we'll talk about how impact and justice are different, but how they relate and complement each other. So first, I'd like to give Tim a chance to introduce yourself. Thanks for being here.
Great. This is fun. I love this. Hey, good to see you all. My name's Tim. Thanks for having me. Just a heads up, I'm recovering from quite a bad cold, so I'm a bit croaky. That's why. And secondly, I'm recovering from the England batting collapse in the Ashes this morning. Oh no, I knew there'd be at least one Aussie in the room. Right, I'm off. Any cricket fans? Okay, wrong crowd. But yeah, I work for Just Love. I grew up in a small town called Burnham-on-Crouch, which is on the Essex coast here in England. It's a great place. I love it. But these days I live in London and work part-time for Just Love and part-time for an MP in North London doing community engagement and community organising. And I live with my mate Neil and a wider community of Christians in Ladbroke Grove. And we kind of do life together and try to do mission and justice together in our part of London.
Alex, introduce yourself.
Okay, so you probably all know me by now, but just to give you a bit of a background on where I grew up, I'm actually from Romania originally. I was born there, and Tim wanted to learn Romanian, but he gave up. Okay. I stayed there for 12 years, after which I moved here with my parents, and we've been living in London basically since I was 12. I'm 27 now. I recently got married to Roy, actually. Yeah. Which is pretty useful to be married to a videographer, seeing how I'm in social media.
That's the endorsement of marriage.
I know.
That's pretty useful for us.
Yeah, there's other benefits too, but that's a good one. I currently am the marketing lead for Christians for Impact. I've been here for around 2 years, and I'm surprised JD hasn't got sick of me yet. So, yeah, that's me.
Awesome. So how many of you have been involved in Just Love in the past? Maybe raise your hand. Okay, so fewer than in past sessions. So why don't we take a moment and give you the mic to share a bit about Just Love. I think it's a really exciting organization doing a lot of good biblical work. But yeah, Tim, tell me more about Just Love, the story and how you got involved and how we how we connected and partnered.
Yeah, nice. I'll try to be brief. Can you all hear me okay, by the way? Yeah, sweet. I'll try to be brief so we can get on to the main stuff, but Just Love's very simple. Started just over 10 years ago with a guy called Tom, memorably Tom Christmas, and he was in between first and second year of uni here in the UK, and he went on a mission trip, and put simply, the reality of global extreme poverty just hit him between the eyes. And obviously he'd grown up knowing that the world was a highly unequal place, but I guess something about seeing it in front of him just floored him. And he came back to the UK like a changed man. And he slotted back into his second year of uni and into student Christianity here in the UK. Just show of hands, who's been a university student in the UK? Okay, a lot of you. You'll know that there's the Christian Union, and there's maybe Pensa, and there's SCM, and there's one or two others as well. And those are all incredible organizations. But if we go back 10 or 11 years, actually, basically nobody was doing justice in the Christian student world. There was a lot of singing, and I love singing. There's a lot of prayer. There was a lot of making sandwiches for people so they could come and hear a talk, which is great. There was a lot of evangelism, but actually we would be walking past homeless people on our streets and everyone would just not know what the heck to do about that. Or you'd be watching the refugee crisis play out in the Mediterranean, and at that point, everyone just was watching on our TV screens as hundreds of thousands of people fled the Middle East and North Africa and were dying in the Mediterranean Sea. And people would just feel paralyzed. I don't know what to do. Anyway, long story short, out of that, Tom gathered a few of his friends and they started a thing where they just basically went around Oxford, which is where he was studying, and befriended homeless people, gave them a hot chocolate and something to eat, and came alongside them. They originally called it Christian Students Against Injustice, which is nearly CSI, but not quite. Thankfully, they rebranded and it became Just Love, which is kind of a play on words. So in one sense, it's about we just want to love people. In another sense, it's our love must be just. It's no good to just have good intentions. We want to see society ordered in a just way. And so that's the kind of play on words of just love. Hilariously, most people don't get that, but it is what it is. And it then grew from there. And these days, we're a network of around 1,000 people around the UK. Still a lot of students involved, but a lot of us now in our early 30s. And we're practicing justice, or trying to practice justice in all sorts of different bits of society. So business, politics, family life, education, healthcare. And hopefully, over the long haul, we have a big kingdom impact. That's us.
Nice. Wow, thanks, Tim. And Alex, you've been involved in Just Love, or you were when you were at uni. Share a bit about that and how that kind of played into CFI for you.
Yeah, so as I mentioned a bit earlier on in my talk, when I became a Christian, literally maybe a month after that, Just Love was just starting up at my university in Southampton. And as a new Christian, I was, of course, very, very passionate about evangelizing and telling everyone about the new good news that I had just found out about. But at the same time, whenever I would look on Facebook or just hear about these children being abandoned and people being killed for no good reason and just so many injustices happening in the world, my heart actually broke, and it especially even broke for animals. I started watching a lot of what actually happens in slaughterhouses and in factory farms, and I was genuinely crying, sobbing. It was as if God had placed a little bit of his heart in mine and allowed me to feel the compassion that he feels for his creation. And then someone came along, I think Tom actually came along to Southampton and talked about the vision of Just Love. And I was on fire for it. I was yes, this is exactly what I wanted to do. And I did, I think in second year, I was just a student, a member of it, just coming to the events. And then in my third year, I became the co-president of Just Love Southampton. And I think one thing that really always saddened me a little bit is to see how many Christians were at, the Christian Union that just weren't coming along to Just Love events. And I was why is this? What can we do about this? Why do not more Christians want to know how we can pursue justice? And I, of course, as a new baby Christian, I was, very unwise and not knowing what I was doing. But I had that heart of a child, and I just wanted everyone to be involved. And while I'm so glad that Just Love exists and that you guys are doing such amazing things and it's still going on in so many different universities, I really do feel there's more students that can come along and be part of it.
Yeah. So maybe we'll say for the end where we hope to go and what our vision is for the future. But I want to just dig into what we mean by justice, what we mean by impact. We actually had a talk that was supposed to be right now on what we mean by impact, but Samuel Dupre, who was going to give it, he fell sick. So unfortunately, he won't be with us to unpack that. But I think it's very related. So Just Love exists to inspire Christians to pursue biblical social justice. What does biblical social justice mean to you, Tim? There's a lot of people who talk about justice, a lot of different visions of that. So what's your vision? What's Just Love's vision?
Yeah, great. So I guess just before I start, I would really commend the CFI definition of impact. There's a little blog, and then there's a video that JD has done. And maybe we'll talk more about it in a minute. If you haven't seen that, just go watch it. It's great. It makes me obsolete. But in terms of what is justice, or the biblical call to social justice, justice is a slippery term. So let me just lay out a few different things that people mean when they say the word justice, and then I'll give you my sense of what it might be helpful to define it as for this conversation. Is that okay? So, number one, some people when they say justice, they mean a legal and criminal justice system that works, okay? So that the law is applied, that people who commit crimes receive sentences for those crimes, that the legal system is not corrupt, but rather it operates efficiently and effectively and fairly, that people are treated in a reasonable way according to the law, okay? That's a really important form of justice, and that is a massive form of justice in the Bible. And obviously, it has huge implications for human life, okay? Secondly, When people talk about justice, some of them mean economic justice, and that's the thing that is in their head. And people would mean different things by that, but often it means some kind of equitable distribution of resources or equitable access to social and financial capital, or something about the economy being fairer in a given place or in the world. Okay, so that's one of the things. Thirdly, we might talk about historical or political justice. And this is especially the case in post-conflict zones or in post-colonial settings. We're thinking about justice in terms of rebalancing what has been unbalanced in the past. Okay, so where there has been war or imperialism, where resources or whatever else has been extracted from a nation or a place, it's about rebalancing. And there are many other forms as well that we could talk about. For the purposes of today, I'm going to talk about just my sense of what the Bible means when it talks about justice, okay? And I'll give you a definition. It's a little bit wordy, but hopefully it just helps locate where we are. And then we can have a chat about justice and impact and how those things relate and connect. And I think they're really connected. So my best sense is, in the Bible, justice is the fair, wise ordering of society, politics, and interpersonal relationships, so that all creation has room to flourish. Let me just say that again. The fair, wise ordering of society, politics, and interpersonal relationships, so that all creation has room to flourish. That's kind of my sense of justice, and we can unpack that as we go.
At Christians for Impact, we think that justice is a really important thing to pursue, but we do have a definition for what we mean when we think about impact. And it could go more specific, and there's lots of thoughtful disagreements too among Christians about exactly what we consider to be most important at the end of the day. But we think of impact as good outcomes that conform with God's redemptive plans to renew our fallen world. So the emphasis is on outcomes. Impact isn't just about intentions, and it's not just about feeling good or wanting to do, or even desires, wanting to do good. Although even our desires, we might think that that's an outcome that God cares about, right? God doesn't just want a world that's shiny and polished. He wants hearts turned to him. So we would actually consider that not to be in contradiction with impact, but actually precisely one of the impacts that matters to God. And so when I think about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, Alex, when I think about justice, I think of sometimes we mean the same thing, like economic injustice. If it means people living on £2 a day, them having enough money to live with dignity and hope and health, then I think providing for that is both impactful, but it's also a matter of economic justice. But other times I feel like they're used differently. So if we're talking about the processes of society, the way things are ordered, especially the means by which we order them, I feel like that's often much more of a justice matter rather than an impact matter.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get too deep into the weeds before the Q&A. But would you have anything to add to that, or how you think about these lanes?
Yeah, I think the second part of your question from before was how that led me to, I guess, my pursuit of impact. And I think when I think about justice and impact, justice is, what I want to see in the world. And pursuing impact is how we get there. And Christians for Impact, for that reason, has been instrumental in how I think about, how we can see a good and just world according to the Bible, according to what God wants. Because we can try to pursue justice and, make sure that people, animals, that creation is flourishing. But if we're not doing that in the ways that actually do the most good to the beneficiaries, then we might just be burning ourselves out trying to do something that actually isn't moving the needle. And so for me, I see them as completely complementary. Justice is the goal, we want to see a just world as described in the Bible, but the frameworks and the tools that Christians for Impact has given me is helping me to be really wise and steward my career, my time, my money in the most effective way possible. And I think another distinction that I've seen throughout, my time at university and now at Christians for Impact, is this difference between local justice and global justice. I think while I was at university in Just Love, I was focusing, and we were focusing, and rightly so, we were focusing on the community around us, the homeless that we saw around us, the refugees, and all of these are amazing and good things to do. But the reality is that a lot of people are working on these problems as well. But there's not many people who are pursuing, the best most effective impact for like the most extreme poor, sometimes people that we will never see in our lifetime. And I think what Christians for Impact has helped me do is also expand my moral circle to include, my neighbors on the other side of the world that I'm never going to meet, might meet them in heaven, hopefully, but that's really helped me to be able to include not just the people right next to me or, the people that I see on the street, but also people that I'm never going to meet who also need my help.
So when you think about impact and Christians for Impact, where do you see the distinctions between the things we talk about and the things that typical justice-seeking Christians talk about or Just Love talks about?
Great. I mean, maybe I can answer that question by just sharing a few reflections on how, in my view, thinking really seriously about justice can help us reflect on impact and vice versa, if that's okay. I think the headline first would be that, as Alex just said, basically, if we're serious about justice at a global level, it should lead us to be serious about impact. And if it doesn't, something has gone wrong. And this is one of the reasons I'm so grateful for CFI, is it just sharpens the work that everyone else is doing. So when CFI is at its best, it sharpens Just Love, and we're really grateful for that. Especially in our cultural moment, seeking justice can be a bit of like virtue signaling, and it can be a thing that we do to make ourselves feel, that's not justice, right? That's not biblical justice anyway. Unless we are really, really radically concerned about the impact of our activities, we're not actually seeking biblical justice. And so I'd really echo that. In the same way, let me just give you a few ways, in my view, that biblical justice is a lens that helps us reflect on impact. And I'll kind of rattle through these, and then in the Q&A, if any of them feel worth exploring more, we can. If not, put them in the bin. So number one, I think a biblical worldview on justice encourages us to be attentive to the whole of society, so society as an interconnected whole. A risk for us as people who are concerned about charitable interventions in response to healthcare is that we see problems and cause areas as isolated issues, okay? But when we see with a justice lens, it helps us to see, okay, that education intervention is really connected to what happens in the healthcare system, okay? And if you step back a bit further, my view, and I think what the Bible encourages us to see, is at the heart of any society, there are a set of conversations and decisions that are essentially about fairness, honesty, integrity of leadership, character of leadership, corruption, and fairness at the heart of a society. Now, no society is perfect. All societies are fallen. But in the Bible, you see a spectrum, right? Sometimes societies are fairer and more honest at their core, and sometimes they're deeply corrupt. Guess what happens if your society is deeply corrupt at its core? Everything gets affected, okay? Healthcare, education, food distribution, water allocation of resources, like anything you can imagine and that CFI cares about, downstream is affected if society is not ordered well. And so I think that there's a move that thinking about justice causes you to do, which is to step back and think about the whole of society as an interconnected whole. Family, business, education, healthcare. A book I'd really recommend is God, Justice and Society. God, Justice and Society by Jonathan Burnside. He's a legal scholar at the University of Bristol. This book is fantastic. It's about 600 pages long, but he works through the Old Testament law and he treats it as an interconnected whole. It's very, very good. Secondly, and I'll speed up, biblical justice encourages us to be attentive to the whole person, the whole human person, mind, body, heart, and spirit. I can never remember the name. Is it Plena Vida, the thing in Latin America? Vida Plena. There's one of the things that CFI often points people to, which is a well-being project in Latin America. Speaking today. Yeah. What's her name? Joy Bittner. Joy Bittner, speaking later today. Go to it. This is awesome. It's about an integrated whole person view of poverty and the alleviation of poverty. There's way more to unpack than we can do in 1 minute. But in brief, in the Bible, people are not just seen as like basic needs, inputs, outputs, okay? They have a mind, they have a spirit, they have a soul. A common phrase in the Old Testament when God is talking about the experiences of people in extreme poverty is, I hear the desires of the poor, okay? Not just the cries of the poor, not just the needs of the poor, but I hear the desires of the poor. It comes up a few times in the Psalms and in Job in particular. What does that mean? God is attentive to desire, not just basic needs. Basic needs are really important, but biblical justice encourages us to be attentive to the whole person. Why is that important? For a few years, you can get away with just treating symptoms. on like a macro scale over decades and decades in a society, if all you do is just chuck money, I'm not saying this is what CFI does, but it's like, if all you do is chuck money at a problem, you actually fester deeper level problems. This is a bit of a hot take. This is me speaking, not just love. I believe that like European and North American welfare systems basically worked for a little bit because we allocated resources to help people in extreme poverty living in Europe and North America in the 50s and 60s, but over the long haul have basically broken our societies because they didn't engage with humans as whole human beings. That's like a whole nother conversation. You can argue with me and disagree with me, but I'd say that we've got like relational fragmentation and breakdown on a massive level in the West because we haven't had a whole person lens. And my experience of my friends who are living on welfare is that they are dehumanized by that system, and in the long haul that festers problems. Thirdly, a biblical view of justice helps us be attentive to history, okay? To history. So often in the Bible, the prophets, when they speak about justice, look at Amos, Micah, Obadiah, whoever, they're bringing up stuff that happened 50, 100, 200 years ago. Why? You could say, that's not relevant right now, we're focusing on today's problems. But the prophets have an understanding that history really matters, and that if we want to be impactful in our dealing with the world, we need to have a cognizance of history and what has gone before. Four, in biblical justice, we are attentive to power and building power. Over and again in the Bible, and I haven't got time to give you chapter and verse, but God empowers the people he is trying to help. He doesn't just assist them, but he actually empowers them into autonomy and agency, okay? And I think one of the biggest lessons from the global development industry in the last 70 years has been that when we have interventions that just give people stuff, it can work for a little bit, but then it runs out of steam. When, however, you build agency, capacity, and power in the people you're attempting to support, social capital, financial capital, relational capital, whatever, it has a long run impact that eats everything else for breakfast. 5, I'm going to really speed up here. Being attentive to biblical justice makes us attentive to ourselves and our own motivations, okay? So in Jeremiah, the human heart is deceitful beyond all measure, who can discern it, right? And this is one of the things I appreciate most about CFI, by the way. I think CFI, more than most spaces I know, operates with like a profound intellectual and emotional humility. I think that this is, some of you will be really in the CFI world, some of you, this is your first time in the CFI space. I hope what you pick up today, these guys are very humble because they don't just think, here's a problem in the world, like my first best guess of what to do is the right response. There's like a profound intellectual humility that says, we're going to need to sit with this. We need to think about this for a while. That's really biblical, okay? In the Bible, we're encouraged to operate with wisdom, to reflect on things, to steward our gifts and talents well. And that's actually a really humble thing to do. And number 6, and this is where I'll finish and shut up, like the biblical worldview on justice really encourages us to be attentive to the role of the global church. I do believe that ultimately God's strategy for redemption of the world is that he blesses the church, and then through that blessing, it flows to every nation on earth, okay? Genesis 12, God meets with Abraham. The Tower of Babel has just collapsed. In the kind of dust settling of the collapse of Babel, God meets with one family, and he says to that family, I will bless you, and through you, every family on earth will be blessed. And I profoundly believe that is still God's strategy. And there's something there for us to reflect on that I think is important. Forgive me, I've probably gone over a little bit, but there's some thoughts.
I do want to share one distinctive that I see. I think that there is an emphasis on outcomes that sometimes doesn't neatly fit into justice categories. And I think having like a very shrewd, strategic cap on lets you notice these things, whereas they might not fit into some like coalition that's able to represent themselves. Anything could be framed as an injustice, but I think, for instance, of like global lead poisoning, which actually, I mean, it affects millions of children worldwide, like tens, hundreds of millions of children worldwide. There's no safe level of lead poisoning. There's no like safe level of lead consumption in your body. But every year there is estimated like over 1 million deaths from lead poisoning. And maybe that's an injustice. Maybe there's a community person that should have known better, that should have rightly ordered their society better to make sure that there wasn't lead seeping into the water that the children are drinking. But maybe this is just like one of those things that slip through the cracks. And we as Christians see an opportunity for outcome. We know in heaven there's not going to be any lead poisoning. The streets are made of gold, not lead. And that we as Christians can like maybe we lobby, or maybe we develop like lead-free solutions. So I think if you have that lens of I'm focused on outcomes, you might be able to get above some of the battles of the justice issues of the day. Not that Just Love is embroiled in silly justice battles, but there's real justice battles to be fought. But I think both perspectives really complement. So with that, I'm going to ask Alex if you have anything to add before we jump into the Q&A.
Anything to add about
this high-level conversation? Anything to add? Yeah.
I think I really loved what you said there at the end about God blesses people through the global church. And I think that's ultimately what excites me the most about both CFI and Just Love, is two organizations that are seriously taking their role as the hands and feet of Jesus on this earth. And, if you look through the history of the church, so many schools, so many hospitals, so many charities, so much good has happened because of the global church. And right now, we are at an incredible opportunity to do so much more good, because there is so much suffering, but at the same time, Christianity is still alive, it's still growing, people are becoming Christians and meeting Jesus all the time. And I think all of us in this room have the opportunity not only to do as much good as we can and pursue justice in the best way that we can, but also to inspire others around us. And I think, one thing that I would love for you guys to take away from this is, just as I was inspired by Tom and by Tim and by JD, you can also be those catalysts of inspiration for other people, other Christians around you, to kind of be like, being a Christian is not just about going to church, reading your Bible and praying once a day. It's so much more. It encompasses your whole life. And we are literally here to bring the kingdom of heaven on earth. And I think if we all take that, deeply and seriously, we can do so much more. Yeah.
Awesome, great. Thank you everyone for submitting questions. And if you haven't yet seen them, take a look at them, upvote your favorites. I want to start out with the first one. It was a question of how do you measure the impact of justice? How do you measure the impact of justice? And I think that's a hard question. I don't have all the answers. At Christians for Impact, we think about how do you measure impact itself? And one way we think about this is the number of people you help by how much you help them by. The number of people you help by how much you help them by. And so clearly, if you can provide life-saving medicine to one person, that's not as good as providing life-saving medicine to two people, all else equal, right? And so if the same program at the same cost can help more people or the same amount of people in a greater way, that's more impact. And that's bringing about more of the change that God wants to see in the world. And when we think about injustices like healthcare injustices, actually there are ways to put this to numbers, and the NHS has ways of doing that. And we can talk about that. We can get into the weeds about that. I don't have to right now, but there's actually ways of comparing different amounts of justice that you can bring. For instance, years of life brought to people who would have otherwise lost it. It's hard when it's fuzzy, right? Like, how do you measure the justice brought by having like a secure state that doesn't have like burglaries where people break into your house? Economists try to measure that, but there's never really something quite like home and knowing that you're safe. So I think it gets quite hard. But how would you describe, how do you measure the impact of justice?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic question. I'm not an expert, so I'm just going to share a couple of intuitive thoughts, but maybe we can bounce this around.
Is anyone an expert?
Yeah, like, I don't know. Maybe there is someone in the room, I don't know. I think that maybe let's break up a couple of things here. One is impact of justice at an individual level. And I think some of these things we could talk about, well-being, number of years added to somebody's life, all sorts of other measurements that you can actually make about the impact on an individual or even a local community. I think that's already pretty complicated. When it gets to the level of an entire nation state, wow, like that's so complex. Just a couple of thoughts. I think you can come up with some fairly good proxies. So who knows IJM, or International Justice Mission? They're a charity working around the world to end everyday violence, okay? A lot of what they work on is human trafficking and slavery, but they also work on other issues around everyday violence to the global poor. They measure stuff like how many reported crimes in a given nation state or a given region result in prosecution and prison sentences. Okay, that's quite heavy, but you can measure that. And over time, they can see through their interventions and the interventions of others a significant increase in the number of prosecutions of people who traffic other individuals, okay? I know this is really heavy. That is a good measure that legal system is becoming more just, that legal system is becoming more capable of dealing with injustice, okay? Now, that's not an entire society, but it's a benchmark that shows something. I think Transparency International have their global corruption index. I don't know how good it is. I don't know anything about it. But I think that's a wise thing to measure. If you can measure the degree to which corruption is being stamped out in a society, it will also tell you lots about that political system more broadly. Those would be a couple of things that I'd point to myself. What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's helpful. And yeah, I would add I think looking at a population level, you can actually add up the individuals in the population. Providing justice in a nation with 10 million people is, I would say, 10 times as good as providing justice to a nation of 1 million people. So I think the individuals aggregate, but there's a whole talk about that. So there's a question here: how do you balance the tension between looking at justice in a wide, holistic sense and a focused, specialized sense? Maybe that has to do with what I was just talking about at a large level versus a small level, which maybe what we could talk about. If anybody asked that, if you could clarify the question if I misunderstood that, please feel free to. Don't feel pressure to. So, but yeah, so there's questions about how do you compare individual acts to acts, for one individual person versus acts that affect many, many people. And I'm partial to the view that says we should treat everyone impartially. We should treat everyone as made in the imago Dei, in the image of God, and everyone is equally deserving of God's love and of dignity and care, whether they're a citizen in this country or that country, whether they have this passport or that passport, this income, that income. And so I think really we should be looking at the whole world and looking at where there's the greatest injustices and doing the most we can to lift as many people out of those, have as impact on as many people as possible. There is a tension between about how confident you can be about the effectiveness of what you're doing if you're helping people in different ways or really high level ways. We have much higher confidence that if you're a good neighbor to your next door neighbor, you can show love to them than say influencing national macroeconomic policy, right? So you might have much higher certainty in the local or the individual level than you would on the national level. And I think that's just a bullet you got to bite if you're looking to change the world. And you can change the world by changing one life at a time. You just might not have impact at scale in the way that some of us feel called to. I really like the idea of individuals making radical pledges to give a lot to the world's poorest people or the greatest needs, because that way, as an individual, you can make a concrete step, say give 10% of your income, donate that to the world's most effective charities, and over a lifetime save dozens of lives that would have otherwise been lost, or lift hundreds of people out of extreme poverty. And those are each individuals that matter to God. And that might sound very abstract or aggregated. It's certainly not a whole country, but each of those lives matter to God. And if that was you, me, or anyone in our family, wouldn't we do that in a heartbeat? So, would you add anything?
Maybe not directly on that, but on the question of how do you balance individual stuff with the whole society. Just one simple thing. So anyone come across Tim Keller? He's an author. We love Tim Keller. He wrote a book called Generous Justice. Would really recommend Generous Justice if you want to start thinking about the theology of some of these things. The point that he makes in that book is really one line from Job. Job says to God, I have put on justice like my robe and righteousness like my turban. I have put on justice like my robe and righteousness like my turban. And the point that Tim Keller makes is that justice isn't so much something that Job does. It's like a posture. It's like this thing, it's the clothes that he wears in his day-to-day. And I think that whether you're focused on individuals or focused on a nation state or anything in between or even bigger, yes, you're concerned with just outcomes, but you're also concerned with the way in which you operate. And as an individual in a big, complex economic or political situation, am I going to be an individual who puts justice on like my robe and righteousness like my turban? And I think that's part of the biblical worldview here, this may be releasing.
Nice. We're going to have justice turbans next year, so come back for that. So we've got a question. How do you decide to pursue justice through your career versus through earning to give to such causes? So I think you can do both. I think you can at least maybe not like maximize and also directly have an impact in the maximum way. But like in almost any job, you can be quite generous, even if it's not 10%, maybe 5%. But yeah, I think it depends on the problem area and your skill set. You might have a skill set that is better attuned to directly working in the problem you're trying to tackle. So if you're really, really good at policy and like networking and relationships, you might actually have a lot more impact for the global poor by influencing DFID and global development policy in the UK than by trying to like hustle to make it to earn a lot of money so you can give to save 500 children's income or lives. You can, I mean, in DFID, like with the USAID, our US Global Health Program that was basically defunded, PEPFAR, the most impactful version of that, saved an estimated 20 million lives from HIV. And like the people that are working right now to get that reinstated, if they can, with God's help, successfully do that, they will have way more impact through their career, through their lobbying, through their advocacy than they ever could, unless if they were a Bill Gates, like if they ever could earning money and give it away. So I think you can do both, but just know yourself and get advising from someone who can tell you based on the problem you're tackling and what your skills are, what's better for you. I'm gonna read the next question, which is, who is our neighbor? Should distance, proximity play a role in who we choose to impact?
Yeah, we'll talk a lot more about that in the keynote talk later today. But that is a good question to ask. Obviously, someone asked that to Jesus in one of the Gospels. But I don't think that distance and proximity should play a role. That should play as much of a role as it currently does. I think we tend to like automatically prioritize those closest to us. And I think we could definitely do with a lot more bring in our priorities of the ones who are, not close to us and not like in proximity a lot more than we currently do without neglecting those close to us, because we can do both, right? We can be loving to those around us. We can always be these like lights and pursuing justice to people who are like close to us at the same time as giving to people like on the other side of the world. So there isn't like an either or. And I really do think that we can do both, and we should up our prioritization of the ones who are more distant to us.
Yeah. Next question. While working in justice, you may experience passionate anger due to injustice. How can one navigate this biblically? That's such a good question. I remember feeling super angry when PEPFAR was defunded, just like imagining all the mothers who are not going to get anti-HIV retrovirals and how many kids will get HIV needlessly and die prematurely because some fools didn't know better. And maybe they did know better and they intentionally wanted this. That's the most frustrating, angry thing. And I think what I have to remember is that I also have that anger in my own heart. And I need to pray for these people. God calls us to pray not for our friends, but for our enemies. And I think that's what makes the gospel so beautiful, is it's not just the transformation of the world, but it's the transformation of our hearts, that we would become the kind of people that don't just want what's good out there, but we are becoming first fruits of Jesus' love and peace. So I think the best version brings both, and you can't have good out there without praying and fostering love in your heart. So
I really agree. I think whoever asked that question, your anger is not a sin. Your anger at injustice and oppression and violence is completely appropriate, and it is utterly consistent with the God of love. Because of his love, his intense love, the purity of his love, God is angry at the state of the world. The Bible never once, in the whole of the Bible, start to end, does it tell you not to be angry, okay? Your anger is valid, it's right, it's righteous. The scriptures encourage us to not let the sun go down on our anger, okay? What that means is steward your anger and take time and space to process it with the Spirit of Jesus Christ in you, such that your anger resolves into love, okay? Such that your anger resolves into forgiveness, liberation, and freedom, okay? So the problem is not your anger, it's where that anger goes. There's a lot to be said there, and our emotions are complicated, but God's anger is righteous, and it resolves into love and compassion, and into action in the world, okay? That's quite wordy, but your anger is not the problem. Do not let the sun go down in your anger. That's the way the scriptures teach us. Sorry to...
Very good. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I want to give Tim maybe like 15 seconds for you to share any final plugs for Just Love, maybe where you want to be in the future, 5 years from now, or just any closing parting shot in 20 seconds or so.
Yeah, great. First, get involved with these guys. They're fantastic. We are so grateful for them. If you want to be part of a network of thousands doing justice in the way of Jesus, come chat to me. We are the Just Love Network. We're up and down the UK and around the world more broadly. We want to be, in 5 years' time, thousands of people all across the world connected with each other in deep relationship, working on justice. One thing you could get involved in is Better Story. Better Story is a response to Christian nationalism. If you're concerned about the way that the conversation is going here in the UK around race, refugee rights, migration, and the Christian faith, come talk to me. They're going to do a massive kind of Unite the Kingdom carol service in a few weeks. We're really concerned about that. If that's gone over your heads, no worry. But if you're concerned about like Tommy Robinson and Nigel Farage, we've got some answers. We want to do some stuff. We need your help.
Thank you so much, Tim. And thanks, Alex. Yeah.